Hello, Dave Marsh, the Spy Guy here again. Uh, when I did try that, I did get a decent video out of in video. Uh, would have been a perfect introduction. I would have been happy to pay $20 for it or $30 for it, but they wanted to charge my card at $30 for a yearly subscription, full front. Oh, you can pay $30 a month. Fine, I'll give you your $30. I'll cancel after a month. No, they wanted to charge me the whole year up front. I'm not paying you that for a video that I can probably get for free somewhere else. So, congratulations, you lost a customer by your shady, underhanded tactics. What else could I say? Oh, we'll get back to. It turns out that phone call I was expecting and I had to take. Turns out it's not till 4:30 now. For some reason, the texting come in to one of those times when the text comes late. So I misread the understanding. The person had texted me, "Hey, I'll call you in half an hour," but instead of it arriving after before she called, it came afterwards. So phones. What can I say about it? So this is kind of interesting. We're getting into the digital stuff, and then I'll pull up the redacted video as well.
You've got a forward command outpost, which, all the laptops come out, all the generators get, in other words, the electronic signature of the unit goes, oof.
Yeah.
Do you recall when you started seeing that for the first time?
I do. I had kind of an odd military path, by the way. I got out shortly after Desert Storm in 1994, to be specific. They got rid of 6,000 lieutenants, and then I was one of those that left. I didn't want to leave, but the Army shrunk from 750,000 down to 500,000.
Mm-hmm.
So 250,000 people had to be involuntarily separated, and I got caught up in that. And I went to work actually eventually. During this period of time,
involuntary separated. You gotta love how the military loves their euphemisms. In that case, he was fired or let go. He was laid off
as an aide to Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, a military and defense aide.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I got sent on there, and I want to say it was 1997, was a 4th Infantry Division digital division, where they were modeling what was going to happen in the future. And so there was this big thing, and I think it was not Fort Bliss, it was Fort Hood, Texas, where they had this digital division that was going to be trained there, and they were going to do a demonstration for a bunch of military aides from both Congress and Senate, et cetera. And so I went with this group, and we went to it. Now, I actually fought in this, so I had some idea of what I was looking at. Most of the other people had never been in the military, and they were just wowed by all the coolness of it. And there were literally, like you said, laptops everywhere, antennas, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember asking some of the guys, I'm like, how would this work if you were fighting a peer, somebody who had, the ability to recognize your electronic signature and target it? How would you avoid that? Because if this thing goes out right here, I mean, everything that we're doing with this digital, because that was called the digital division, all your comms would be knocked out if you lost this one node here, and everything's supposed to be connected. And of course, they said it wouldn't happen because of our countermeasures and blah, blah, blah. Well, I hope you're right.
Yeah, definitely. Hope you're right that everything goes in combat. Everything that is supposed to go wrong goes wrong. So.
Then after that, then I went back in active duty shortly after 9/11. In 2002, I went back onto active duty, first as a mobilized reservist, and then later just reaccessed back into active duty. That's when I went on, completed my career. But one of my first assignments in 2007 was with the Future Combat Systems. And now then, this is what's supposed to be, now where it's supposed to be building on the digital division. Now we're going even further with this whole system of systems. It was 18 systems of multiple systems that were all linked together, et cetera. And again, and now I'm on the inside now. I'm actually in the unit. I said, hang on. you're predicating all of this stuff working, and you have reduced the amount of armor protection by like 40% and the weight, et cetera, because we don't need it now, because information will protect us and give us perfect information on the enemy on the battlefield with drones, with perfect communications that link everything together, indirect fires with the shooter to sensor, whatever. You don't have to see it anymore. A tank can fire this round. It'll go over a hill because you'll have a laser over here and all this kind of stuff. And I said, what if the comms don't work? What if they aren't perfect, as a matter of fact? Or what if the intelligence isn't perfect? And
because we always have perfect intelligence. This channel is dedicated to exposing the intelligence as a bunch of fraud.
We still have to have a good old-fashioned tank fight. And now then our tanks are going to be 40% less protected, so that even a high-powered machine gun can take them out.
Where are these tanks? French tanks? AMX-10s?
and the other side still has good protection from their frontal armor anyway. How's that going to work out? And it won't happen. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Except that, Larry, in the actual testing, the field testing that we physically conducted, the comms never worked out. They were always shoddy. So we never had that connectivity. And when me and other majors, I was a major then at this time, we're saying, generals, colonels, how is this stuff going to work? Because the comms aren't there. They were saying, be quiet, because, and this is something I saw in Afghanistan.
Be quiet. Remember, people got to get promoted. Can't get promoted.
Said Larry, we can't, and I know this for a fact because a friend of mine who was a colonel at the time was in one of these meetings that took place, and he told me afterwards, and he said that when the chief of staff of the Army came down after one of these failed experiments, they were going to have to he was going to have to brief Congress on the results. And he said, what are we going to do? Because we can't tell them this, because if we tell them what happened here, the Congress may pull the funding. And they may say it's not going to work. And we just have to work through the bugs, because we'll eventually get there. And there's all this good stuff, but we can't have them make the wrong decision and pull the plug on this. So we've got to tell them something else. So they literally shuffle the deck here and, look at this card over here and pull another one out. And they changed the terms. And they said, okay, this is no longer a test. This was now, and I forget the exact term they used, but something like an interim evaluation or something like that. Well, a test was required by law to be reported to Congress, but this interim evaluation, or whatever the term they actually used, did not.
Oh.
So instead, they just changed the name of it to something else so that the results didn't have to be promoted up or reported up. Now, as people may know, they couldn't keep that hidden forever. And then it turned out that I guess a year and a half later, the Secretary of Defense said, yeah, y'all are stupid. This ain't working, and did pull the plug on it. But it should have happened a lot earlier, or we should have been honest about it. And then we could have made something that was, incrementally better than what we had genuinely. But instead we saw, this unobtainium is what we ended up calling it. We want the perfect thing that's over here. That's basically the videos that we made about how great this is going to be someday, and pretended like it actually was. And instead we get nothing. The program's canceled, $20 billion wasted, a decade of time wasted. And by the way, we went on subsequent, the ground combat vehicle, and I forget 2 or 3 other iterations after that about how we were going to get it. This new combat vehicle, based on all the stuff we'd learned, never got produced. And to this day, what we started as a concept in 1999 to replace the tanks and the Bradleys, we still have tanks and Bradleys, ones and Abrams, and we still don't have a single production prototype of anything else. The incompetence.
And then you wonder why you have $1 trillion defense budget. Like, what the hell? Everyone's lying. It's all about getting promotion. And you don't get promoted if you fail or report failure. You only go up as long as you tell the principal what he wants to hear, or he or she what they want to hear, you're safe. But if you're a squeaky wheel, and I encountered this in corporations too. I was once in a situation where, like, this person kept complaining about this minor little thing. And I told my manager and I told all of my fellow employees, what's going on here is this person keeps complaining. And they're like, yeah, she always complains. Just ignore her. That's just the way she is. And I'm like, okay. And then later, I'm finding it impossible to do this other thing. And then another person up above me is saying, why aren't you doing your thing? And I'm like, I don't know. The program isn't working the way it's supposed to, according to my training. And this. And then we finally figured out that what that woman in the shipping was complaining about was tied to what my issue was and the buyer's issue. Like, we were there for 2 or 3 weeks pulling our hair out, trying to figure out what was going on, all because people kept saying, ignore the squeaky wheel. And that's corporate, and that's where the profit motive comes in. The military doesn't have to do that. They just get failure after failure after failure. And then the stuff that goes to production, like we watched with the video I did on the British system, new armored personnel carrier that's literally making its troops sick,
is off the charts. And yet, you're not going to be surprised by this, but maybe some will. Nobody ever paid a price for this. To the contrary, they got promoted.
Yeah.
The guy who was in charge of that, 1-star general, got a 2nd star and a Legion of Merit, and ended up being a division or a corps commander in 3-star before he retired. It was just egregious.
Yeah, this is endemic to the military, this lack of accountability. And I was laughing at the comms issue. So when what was called the emergency support team, later the foreign emergency support team, which was a State Department led team that comprised of the FBI, 3 or 4 representatives of JSOC, the CIA. It was to respond to an overseas terrorist incident, and it responded right at, I arrived state CT in October of 89, and within 3 weeks, the FEST EST was deployed to El Salvador because the Salvadoran guerrillas had surrounded a group of Delta Force guys in a hotel. And it was a bad decision on the part of the guerrillas. But anyway, we deployed the whole thing. And part of the FEST bird was to have this comms capability. Well, when they got there on the ground, the comms didn't work. Jump ahead to 2000, or was it 2001? So I'm down at JSOC compound. We're conducting a small comms exercise. General Doug Brown, who was then the head of JSOC, was going to take off on the JSOC bird, and we were going to establish that this new comms system would work. So I was role playing Ambassador Ann Patterson, who was the then U.S. ambassador to Colombia. I affected the voice and all.
Yeah, I'm sure he also had to get himself addressed, but it would still be in Hawaiian style. I'm sure he got himself a Hawaiian style dress to put on to pretend to be Ann Patterson.
Anyway, when it came time for the comms, it was didn't work. So we're not talking about some 2nd or 3rd echelon unit that's down in the food chain. I'm at the pointy end of the damn spear, and it didn't work. And then, so what happened was they did a workaround where then Captain Tom Williams, he was a Navy SEAL assigned to JSOC, and we later worked together as contractors. He basically called me up from the JSOC main headquarters, which is just about 300 yards from where I was sitting, to say, okay, so we went through the hoops. But my point is, even with the passage of time, the comms is still an issue. It's still a problem. And as you point out,
yeah, there's a great scene in the movie. God, it's the only movie made on Grenada by Clint Eastwood. Or Hamburger Hill or something like that. But there's a great scene, and this is based on a true story, where they lose radio contact. They're surrounded by the recon platoon is surrounded by all these Cubans that were not supposed to be on the island, and we're kind of did not expect. So, like Grenada, it's got a new communist government, and it's like nothing, right? They have supposedly have 100 doctors and nurses from some American school there, and they're being held hostage. So Reagan pissed off after Beirut has gone into this place and sent in a giant military force, which is what I think Trump will ultimately do in Venezuela. He's going to do a Grenada-style operation. And they land there, and this Cuban construction battalion has no idea what's going on. So they just start attacking the Americans because they think they're under attack. Maybe World War III is breaking out. And there's a scene in the movie where guys like, we got to make a phone call. We got to call in for combat support, but our radio's been taken out. But they do have a phone. So they take out the phone, and they get an operator, and the operator says, well, we need to make an emergency long distance call. And he's like, they want a credit card or something. And the guy's got a credit card because that's the type of guy. He doesn't leave go into combat without his American Express card. And the next scene is like, you're calling for some woman at the base going, you're calling from where? Needless to say, they got the air support.
Now, the bureaucracy doesn't fix itself quickly. Now, compare that to what we've seen over the last 3.5 years with Russia and the special military operation. Would you agree that the Russians have appeared to be pretty flexible and quick to respond when they got something on the front lines that's not working?
You know, I'll tell you, Larry, I wish I could cite the specific study. I want to say it was the Washington Post, maybe around the ninth month of the war. I can't remember, but they did an analysis to find out why the Russian military had made so many tactical errors and operational errors, et cetera. And it turned out that the Russian military, by the way, it really surprised me. I thought they would be a lot better on day one than they were, because I'd been seeing over the previous years a lot of these large scale exercises, Zapad 2020, 2021 or something like that. A lot of big operations every other year, every 2 years, something like that. Big scale too. And I thought, you know, they have done a lot of these things, because I thought it must be like what we did with Reforger, because I had taken part in the Reforger exercises where they had these bunch of units maneuvering over hundreds of kilometers, et cetera. And I knew how good those were. And I figured the Russians were doing the same. But it turns out that the Russians were doing kind of what we did at the FCS. And they just papered over a lot of stuff, and they just pretended to do something. They claimed all these successes. Really, they were just driving around in preordained, you know, routes, et cetera. And so they did not actually learn lessons until it cost them blood. And once it started costing them blood, then all of a sudden, all that other crap went out the window. They fired people who were not performing. They brought people up from the bottom who were. They started listening to people, and even that was slow. But then once they finally got to that point to where now all of a sudden they're at least as much as you can in a human entity, a well-oiled machine. We're still back in the FCS days. That's one of the reasons why I say we cannot compete with Russia right now. However arrogantly we want to say we're better than them, by far the best in the world, et cetera, because we haven't burned away all of that chaff.
Yeah, it's a problem. It's like, I was looking at one. They said, "Oh, we had an exercise with 60,000 men recently," and I'm like, "Yeah, but most of these guys are on boats. The crews are like 200-300 men." And I was trying to look up because I'm interested, like the Reforger exercises that he was just talking about, these large scale operations, and I'm trying to find out what the names of the units are involved in this, and I can't find any of that information out there. They're telling me it's happening. They're telling me there's 60,000 people involved. But what is it? How many? What is the scope of the exercise? What are they doing? Can't find that out. Why? Because they're like he said, they're papering it over. They're making it look like they're doing stuff when they're not.
We haven't burned away the lessons not learned, et cetera, and we still just ignore the things that don't work and pretend they will. But the Russians, it's life and death. So you don't get to have bureaucracy over there. You either fix it or you die and fail. And well, they've chosen the path that seems pretty effective so far.
Well, yeah, I've been impressed with, and it's also been on the Ukrainian side. But what we've seen, early on when the tanks are getting blown up by drones, they came out initially, they put a cage around it, and they keep innovating what they're doing with to protect the tanks, and they've actually now looked like got a system that works. Similarly with at the outbreak of the war, I wasn't paying attention at all. I didn't even think about drones. Now here we are, 46 months later. That's about all that we're talking about is the drone, the importance, and it's not just one kind; it's different varieties,
many classes. Yeah,
and they've gotten to where I don't know, and maybe you've got some insight on this. Right now, what we're seeing with the Russians is troops on the ground are in immediate communication with the guys running the drones. They've got a net-centric combat operation. And so you don't have to wait for an answer to come back. You can get a real-time answer. Do you think we're up to speed on that, or are we lagging behind?
No, that's virtually guaranteed we're way behind. And the best example that I can see, you may remember earlier this summer, there was a really corny video that Secretary of Defense Hegseth published where he's talking in front of the Pentagon and there's these drones following behind him. And he's talking about how we're going to do all this great stuff. And then just about a week or so ago, there is a story, I think you and I even talked about it last time you were on, where we said that by 2027, we're going to be able to produce up to 300,000 drones. And I popped a couple of headlines on there that both the Ukrainians and the Russians right now are producing around 100,000 per month.
Yeah.
And of course, as you just alluded to, even with that, you have to have this constant cycle of innovation. The enemy makes a counter innovation. You have to counter the counter, and it just never stops.
Right,
and you've got to have a real nimbleness of mind and a system that can be rapidly adjusted. When you're talking about putting in orders for something a year and a half from now to get up to 300,000, I mean, that shows you don't have any nimbleness of mind or recognizing how rapidly and how fast things change on the modern battlefield. And you take that mind that's thinking in a year and a half increments and you put it onto a field where somebody's figuring in the next 4 or 5 days and they keep moving back and forth you're not going to survive very long on that battlefield.
Correct.
Well, in fact, that's what when I first read Andre Martianos, his first book, Losing Military Supremacy, boy, that was an eye opener. And the same things that you have now commented on, that's what he was pointing out. And God help us if we actually go forward with some of this nonsense about getting into combat, because we're not ready. And
Larry, I mean, that's more poignant and more urgent than we may have thought even yesterday. This morning, the Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, all but laid out a declaration that we're going to war against Russia. You may think that's an overstatement, but it's not. If you look at this speech that he gave this morning in Germany, this said Russia's coming after us and we have to be ready to strike. And he just laid out all these things.
Oh my God! And the people are talking about this especially on English, where they're like, you're not patriotic to go fight, and all these people are like in England are like, we're not fighting for you guys. You've made a mess of our country, and it's like, and if they do go and fight, they're going to come back and overthrow Parliament. Like, I do not think this is going to be this is not well thought out. Like, we do not have the capabilities of what we have 30 years ago. Like. In Germany, it's a crime for a soldier to wear his uniform off duty in public. They have so thoroughly emasculated their military forces because globalists want to do that. They got DEI all over the place in in the military. We had that video I did on the British APC. Like, this is just crazy. And where they're like, they don't want white men pilots in the Royal Air Force. Like, you think we have this completely crazy ideological thing where we've tried to destroy our militaries and with all this woke nonsense, and it's way worse in Europe than America or Canada, from what I can tell. Canada is still we're way less woke despite Trudeau. Trudeau really was going through the motions. Most of the stuff here is just classic, like the environment. We want to exploit all our resources and ship it overseas to China or Europe or whatever, but then all the environmental groups will block all the oil pipelines and all the infrastructure bills necessary to do all that stuff. So Canada is like not as woke as some of these groups are in the bureaucracy, but it is, we don't have the DI stuff as much in the bureaucracy from what I can tell. It's just people, we just have the Ministry of Environment being not willing to do controlled burns, stuff like that, because it hurts the environment. No, it helps the environment. The First Nations have been doing this for thousands of years before we got here, and they're begging us every year. Can we go out and do that? By the way, First Nations, for anyone else, is Native Americans, but we don't call them that here. We call them First Nations, which really are. They were here first, and they had some nations. So, and I think it's a better term. I think America should adopt it. Less confusing that way.
Things are going to do very, very bellicose statements, etc. And this just gets to one of the issues that people just refuse to acknowledge in the West, that actions have consequences. We should have already learned this lesson, but we haven't. And when you say those kinds of things and you start taking actions and funding things, what does anyone think that the Russians are going to do in response? But they're going to have a reaction to it.
Yes.
They're going to have to, by requirement, they're going to have to prepare for it, not just to win this war, but you're going to make them actually start ramping up to do things to meet this, this force that you're talking about bringing closer to the Russian border. I mean, this is so absurd. There should never be a war between NATO and Russia. No chance that there should ever be a war. There's no necessity for it unless we make one.
Right.
And then you have the chance for miscalculation, stupidity, or any accident even, and then we could be in one. And that is why this is so alarming to me.
Well, I promised to get you out here before an hour was up, and that's a good point. And it's a depressing point to end on, but it's a good point to end on. Mm-hmm. Now, I will make a suggestion that when this video will come out in about a day or so, that my editor just has to clean up a few things. Make sure you post this at Deep Dive.
And that's one reason why I wanted to, when I heard this from Larry Johnson saying this, I'm like, I feel a lot better about like using some of these guys' stuff when they're saying, yeah, we want the message to get out there. So even though my audience is small, and I do appreciate you guys for watching my stuff, I like having the ability to reach into these type of things and talk to these people. I do have hopes of one day interacting with Larry Johnson again, or meeting Daniel Davis on one of these calls and just getting into some of this stuff. I do have people who know these people. I have one big guy who will come on. He says because he was in a similar boat as me at one point, that he'll do any show once. And so that's great. So, and he's a friend of Larry Johnson. So maybe I can get him, depending on how that goes. And my intention is to build this up to being somewhat profitable going concern. Like some of the other people out there that are my friends who may have huge platforms or do their own stuff. Like I'm not going to get into the royal coverage like some of them have, but like my one friend, Andy, he said, who has almost 1 million subscribers on his channel, Popcorn Planet. He's like, I don't like doing the royal stuff, but I do one royal hit and it pays my mortgage for the month. So, yeah, so I have plans to expand out and meet other people and get more involved and do this kind of stuff. So I'm not going to do the redacted video on this stream because I don't want to get it confused. I'm going to do it on a separate stream shortly. And so we'll have 3 videos for the day, and that'll be great. Yeah, so if you like this stuff and want to tell your friends, if you like to hear my thoughts on things and learn not just what they're talking about, but my interpretations of what they're talking about, please feel free to like, share, subscribe, and get involved. Comment, and sometimes even chat. That would be the best way to help the channel. So thank you very much. And I'll be back in a few minutes to do the redacted video. Bye-bye.